Thank you, Oklahoma, for joining us today. You know, I'd also want to thank our special guests, leaders in the law enforcement and in the communities here in Tulsa, in Oklahoma City, and across our state, and our wonderful guests. You know, I appreciate the way each of you serve our state and our communities. It was on Sarah and I's heart really to start a discussion, and we thought this would be a great opportunity to help navigate some heavy issues that are affecting our state and our communities right now. I have been really impressed by and grateful really for the leaders in our African American communities who are organizing peaceful and thoughtful demonstrations and movements for change. I've also been heartened by our law enforcement, who I believe have handled this situation better than any other state. So thank you for that. But I know we have room for improvement, and that's also why I believe we're here today. I wanted to take a moment to truly listen, and I really wanted to invite Oklahomans to join me in listening. Sarah and I put together a few questions that we would like to maybe open up and start creating some dialogue. We believe that this is the start to help promoting healing in our state and to learn what we can all start doing to create opportunities for a better future. So I'd like to introduce first the folks that are here with me today, the leaders in our communities. We've got Clarence Hill down on the end, who's the founder of Stronger Together. Clarence is a strong and needed voice for racial reconciliation conversations in Oklahoma. We have Chief Todd Gibson, who's the chief of police at Moore Police Department. We have Captain Marcus Williams from the Cleveland County Sheriff's Department. Thank you for being here. And we have Pastor Herbert Cooper, pastor of People's Church in Oklahoma City. And Pastor Cooper leads a large and diverse congregation in both Oklahoma City and I understand also in Indianapolis. So thank you guys so much for joining us today. So my first question I have for you, Pastor Cooper, can you share with us about your perspective of what you have seen unfold in our state and across the nation over the last week with these demonstrations?
Yes, I just think all that's transpired really over the last week and the last several weeks, I guess for me has created a lot of emotion. I would say I've had a wide variety of emotions from, you're just looking at all of the tension. I've had, anger, frustration, hurt, confusion, so fear. So just a lot of emotions that I have just encountered myself. And I would say that out of those emotions and me processing and thinking, and it's caused me reflect on my own experiences. And there have been times I have even been devalued because of my own skin color. And so just thinking about that, processing that, even at a deeper level because what's happening in our nation right now. And I can remember my wife and I, as you said, we pastor a diverse church. And there was a white family that started to attend our church, and they came for, 2 or 3 months or so. And they said, we love the church and we love the kids ministry and the teaching and preaching and the worship. And it was, we noticed 2 or 3 weeks or so in a row, we didn't see them in church. And my wife had a conversation with the other wife, and she had mentioned that with a very downcast face, she said that we're not going to be able to continue to attend People's Church. My husband is uncomfortable being around this many black people. And those words, as a black man, really just creates hurt, pain, to feel like someone doesn't want to be around me because of the color of my skin, that we couldn't worship together because of the color of my skin. And I think the part of being uncomfortable is what this is all about. Is we all can feel uncomfortable being around people that are different than us, have a different worldview than us, different skin color than us. And I just really believe we got to press past being uncomfortable and engage in conversation, because it's in conversation, and that's not always easy, but it's in conversation. Even what we're doing today, conversation then creates some relationship. Right. And out of relationship, we get understanding. And that's what I'm hoping that all of Oklahoma in this season that we're in, that we really engage in conversation, create relationship, and that relationship will create understanding. And we've got to do that no matter the color of our skin or our political party, our socioeconomic status. We got to create conversation, because without that understanding, we start to prejudge. Mm-hmm. And that's called prejudice. And that's where we can really end up with a divide instead of uniting to solve Oklahomans' problems.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Anybody have a follow-up comment? Okay, let me go.
I love the comments, Pastor, and I think that the conduit of influence is relationships. And so if we want to change anything, I wholeheartedly agree with your point. It's about building relationships. So thank you for saying that.
Thank you. Clarence, you wrote a really important op-ed this week. In it, you said, the reality of injustice and pain that many people of color have tried for years to communicate is now being heard at a greater level. I really like that. You know, what do you think has kept us from hearing this message, and what can elected officials like myself do to build stronger bridges?
I think that the question itself is going to lead us right to where we need to be, because empathy is the word. It's that ability to share in the feelings or the hurt of someone else. But it's hard to do that in our world today, when a lot of times the national media drives such a politically divided conversation. So much so that in the past 5-6 years, as these racial incidents have kind of come back up, I remember the statements in 2014, 15, and 16 was like, is this really happening in 2015? Is this really happening in 2016? And the sad part about that was, for those of us who are people of color, who have already shared in these stories at our dinner tables, shared in these stories at our family reunions, we already knew that these things were happening. But even we had to mourn, we had to grieve, we had to suffer that pain amongst ourselves. The interesting thing about this George Floyd situation, it is the first time where I've seen such a massive amount of empathy come, especially from the white community, that formerly was saying, hey, just get over it. Hey, are you sure you're not too stuck in the past? What's the big deal? And boy, we've seen empathy. So through the past few years, I'll take you back to 2016. It was an election year, and the same kind of thing happened. Alton Sterling and Philando Castile, unarmed black men, were killed by officers. Then later, 5 police officers were killed in a revenge act of the Dallas police officers. It was just a horrible moment in our history. But man, it was interesting. The first two, when the first 2 unarmed black men died, one group population in America was upset and ready to want to make their voices heard. And another group was quiet. And then when the 5 police officers were killed, then the other group, they woke up and they were upset and they were being vocal about our officers. We want to get to a place where it's all 7, where we as a people together, we mourn for all 7. And so through the years, I've seen a certain group of people that have been, quote, waking up faster than others. And so I did my own little research. I can't tell you that I did a big study on this, but most of the people that could understand before this George Floyd situation, they were people who had a black friend or a person of color in their lives as a friend somewhere in their history. And typically they stayed in touch, maybe even once or twice a year, but their relationship had gone to a level where if they heard a news clip, even if they saw it differently, they had the ability to say, hey, Chief Todd, tell me how you saw that situation. Like Chief Todd and I, we could do that. We could call one another and say, hey, George Floyd situation, how'd that hit you? How'd that hit you? But their relationship opened the eyes. So what we've done in the Stronger Together movement is simply set up principles and values that we believe will help drive us or lead us into unity. And one of the big ones is this: do as a leader, as those who lead our businesses, lead our schools, lead our universities, I always ask the leaders, do you have a personal friend who can give you eyes to see and a heart to feel that situation? Because there are some things, if I'm talking to a parent who's adopted a child or is taking on a drug baby, they can explain it to me all they want to and I won't feel it. But if they're my friend, I'll feel it instantly.
So good.
So it's relationship that I would say for all leaders to have relationship, personal relationship with someone, and then maybe a group of people who can help us serve the communities in Oklahoma together and be eyes for the people that they grew up with and that they know.
That is so good, the way you just explained that. And then how do we develop those relationships and those friendships? Do you have any specific suggestions? Because sometimes we get caught in our rut about just hanging out with people from work or whatever. How do we reach across and meet people maybe that we wouldn't normally meet? And then how do we keep developing those relationships?
Absolutely, great question. First thing I would say is let's just start with step one. Step one is you probably go to a certain world, a gas station, grocery store, etc. And usually what we do without knowing it is that we build a life, I call it a palace, where our world becomes homogenous. And even if there are other people that don't look like us there, we get this selective sight and we don't even see them, so we don't even greet them. So number one, I would just say begin to greet people that don't look like you. The second thing I would say now, take yourself and get into spaces where there are people that don't look like you, and even get bold, go into a space where you're the minority and just begin to engage. And hopefully soon you'll be able to get into a space where you can possibly be invited to the dinner table with someone and open up yourself. And especially for parents, it's a great thing to help our children recognize that the future of America is very ethnically diverse. And let's not set our children up to have the same walls and blockages and blind spots that we have.
That's great.
I think what you just expressed is so critical, and that is intentionality. You won't gravitate naturally into relationships into relationship circles that make you uncomfortable. So we have to all be intentional, but it is the way forward, just all being intentional of building relationships, because relationships are just so critical to building bridges and tearing down walls.
Absolutely. The only thing I would add, because you're right, they don't happen naturally.
That's right.
And that's one of the biggest questions that we receive from our white friends. They're like, I'm admitting I don't have anywhere to start. There are several organizations, and I believe even after this season here in Oklahoma, there'll be a lot more spaces. Get with a group that has conferences, that hosts events where you can be in spaces together, and even get bold. Go to and I joke about it, but I say go to a church where you have to keep the beat. You know, go somewhere where you feel a little bit uncomfortable. And I've learned that most Oklahomans are very welcoming and open. If we can ever get past our political positions and just be human beings, we're a great people. I would say be courageous, and even if you mess up, just keep trying, because it matters.
Yeah, that's so good. And you know, when you travel and you see other states, other countries even, it just increases your worldview, and it's the same thing by reaching across, meeting people that maybe don't look like you, and just having those dialogues. And when we do it brother to brother, you just don't understand what you see on television. It's just so foreign sometimes, because, so I just want to encourage Oklahomans to do that, to reach out. It's so important. Let's turn to some of the law enforcement, some of our folks here, Chief Gibson and Captain Williams. We've seen a lot of powerful images of law enforcement in Oklahoma praying with and hugging those participating in demonstrations. I've loved that. I've seen that on television. You know, how have recent events affected you, your work, and our law enforcement community?
You want me to go first? Well, Governor, the word that keeps coming to my mind over and over again is I'm saddened. I'm sad. I feel like as a career field, as a law enforcement officer, who has devoted my life to serving others, to protecting others, to putting service before self in so many different ways. And we've come so far since the times of Ferguson, and we've learned so much from that, and really have strived to increase our connection, our trust, our legitimacy within the community, and to watch it all go away in the matter of just seconds because of an atrocity that sickens not only police officers, but sickens everybody that sees it. And so right now, there is an element of sadness to me, but there's hope in conversation like this. There's hope in having friends like Clarence in my corner, in our corner, that we can learn from and grow from. And to quote Clarence, we truly are stronger together. Mm-hmm. And we're never going to overcome this because it's not an us versus them issue. Mm-hmm. It's an us issue. It's not police versus everyone else. This is a community issue that involves law enforcement. And law enforcement has come a long way, but we absolutely have a long way to go.
Excellent.
Yeah, it's kind of same thing to echo what the chief said. You know, for me, it's frustrating. It's saddening, especially for me with young kids that I have, and knowing that if we don't get to an understanding that we have a problem to try to sit down and figure out what's going on, then history we know repeats itself over and over and over. And to just sit and see it and have them looking at it on TV or whatever, it's frustrating because why are we here? Enough has happened that you think we know by now, but clearly we don't. But I'm hopeful that through communication we can figure it out. It's time to come to the table and talk, and not only talk but listen through every different types of people that we can get together to get to some kind of common ground to do better. We have to do better.
Excellent.
I know I loved what you said. It's not really an us versus them, because I think that's how it's viewed everywhere. But learning to communicate with the community that this is a community issue. And in Oklahoma, we want something different. And it's that standard. And I know you in law enforcement are constantly trying to communicate that. But what we need to do as a community is come around and link arms, community leaders, law enforcement, the general public, and gather together, because I think that's a powerful statement. It is an us issue. It's an Oklahoma issue, and we want a different standard here in our state. And I think as we begin to waken the conversation, and there are people that are just caught in their own little just their own little life. We're all guilty of falling into our patterns, as you said, and we have to wake up and look around if we want change for the next generations of our state. And that's what's so exciting to hear these conversations, that it is possible, but it's gonna take all of us. It can't just be the four of you. We all have to come around. Every walk of life has to come around and say, I too am gonna raise my hand and throw my hat in the ring to make a difference. And that's what I love hearing, those statements of an us issue. And I think the more we can promote that, the more we can talk about that in a unrestricted, open conversation, because people obviously, as even a child, avoids what is painful. And we've developed that mentality in our state with the race issue and in our country. And the more we talk about it and make it open, it becomes less painful. The opening is less hard. And I believe then we will begin to see the community involvement and people caring that maybe weren't even aware, which is hard to say, but it is going on.
Yes, ma'am. In law enforcement, we welcome it. We want our community to be involved, to be a part of us. We are a part of them, and there shouldn't be a distinction between the police officer and the community member or the resident. We are the people, and the people are the police, and so we are together on this. And you know, it takes change, but one thing I have never really seen be productive is violence. And there is anger, and that anger is justified. And people see life through different lenses. All four of us see life through different lenses based on our past experience, based on where we grew up and our upbringing. And that's okay. That's one of the things that makes us great as a state and great as a country. But where the disconnect comes and what we have to do is to take that anger and turn it into something productive, not violence, and come together and open up that communication where I can see through his lenses. I don't have to agree with his lenses. I don't have to live my life through his lenses, but I need to understand that he sees life through a different set of lenses than I.
So good, because it's important that we hear each other's stories. Because there's power in our stories. There's no arguing our stories.
That's right.
You know, my story is my story, your story is your story, and all of our stories and perspective and our experiences are valid. And we got to now lean in and learn from it. You know, I can learn from your perspective. You know, I can learn from your stories, and you can learn from mine. And all of our stories are so important, so critical to be heard, to be leaned into. And then let's learn from each other.
Yeah. You know, division hurts everybody, and it devalues. And, you know, I believe by coming to the table and hearing stories, we're humanizing the conversation again. So I want to boast on Chief Todd. He came to our church to speak to our staff. And so this, to me, is the extra stuff that you wouldn't expect, because he was a Cleveland County sheriff. And so at the time, it was Sheriff Gibson. And so I stand him up in front of the staff, and they're looking at me like, why did you bring a sheriff to a church staff meeting? And while we were getting prepared, I was asking, at the time, Sheriff Gibson, I said, how are you doing? He said, the last 24 hours, as usual, have been kind of wild. And he named 3 distinct incidents. I believe one was even a child having a loss of life. And the level of trauma and stress that our officers have to endure is something that we won't hear at a time like this. That's why when you start talking about a race conversation, for those who've had family members who are in the military or in the police, they feel like you are speaking down to officers. I believe we've got to be big enough to hear both sides of the story. We're not saying that the story of people of color and that pain is to negate the pain and the real story of a man who has children himself. You know, we both have children, and we're thinking about this conversation. We're like, okay, Dr. King has passed the baton to the next generations. Are we going to give the baton to our children further down the road, or are we going to be stuck? So we all have these values that could drive us to tears when no one's looking. But I want to bring out that point, because a lot of times people are like, if you mention the term race, I don't want to hear it. But I do want to say we all value what our officers have done. I can tell you personally that even in Oklahoma City, a lot of work has been done. It doesn't mean we're all the way down the road to where we want to be, but building relationship in the community, and me as a black male, to this day, the more I personally speak to an officer with their uniform on, I can feel something inside of me shifting and reminding myself, this is a human being, this is a human being. Get Derek Chauvin's knee on George Floyd's neck. Don't put that picture on all of the men and women who serve us.
Great point.
And that's important that you say that, because me being a black man myself and also wearing a badge, you know, it's important that people do understand that actions of one person doesn't reflect everybody. That's right. I can tell you there's not an officer in the vast majority that wakes up every day and say, I'm going to go to work and I'm going to do something to someone. Right. We're not in control of situations that we're presented with, but we are in control of ourselves and our emotions and everything else that goes into effect before we do something. But what you say, to understand that you see that person with that uniform, that you have more of a connection with that, to understand yourself that this doesn't